Modern-day Iran, the vast Mavdasht plain in Fars province, nearly 2,500 years ago. If time could fold, as you stand today upon these limestone ruins known as Persepolis, you are actually standing at the most awe-inspiring center of power in the ancient world. Let us turn the clock back to a spring equinox day in 450 BC. At this time, representatives from 23 nations are forming a neat and solemn procession, slowly ascending the magnificent staircase carved into a massive artificial platform. In the procession, Armenians hold pure silver vessels adorned with exquisite griffin handles. Gleaming in the morning light, Babylonians bring gorgeous, colorful textiles woven by the most skilled artisans along the banks of the Tigris River. Indians carry jars of precious perfumes exuding rich, exotic fragrances on their shoulders. And the Ethiopians, traveling from afar, have even brought a rare long-necked African beast that leaves the Persian nobles in awe, perhaps an okapi or an early giraffe. This is a grand parade of the whole world presenting tributes to the King of Kings. This annual grand ceremony, with its unparalleled majesty and luxury, lasted for exactly 2 centuries on this land. The prestige of the Persian Empire, like the sun hanging high above Mount Ramat, meaning Mountain of Mercy, seemed as though it would never fall. However, the script of history is always full of dramatic twists. Later, at a Macedonian legion banquet filled with wine, music, and revelry in 330 BC, a high-class Athenian courtesan named Xerxes stood up and delivered a speech to the world's most powerful conqueror. She raised a blazing torch. In just one night, this architectural miracle, which cost the blood and sweat of generations of Persian emperors and took over 200 years to build, was reduced to swirling ashes in the sky. But there is a deeply ironic historical fact here. The Persians who created this city never called it Persepolis. Persepolis is a purely Greek name, meaning city of the Persians. This is a name bestowed by the very people who destroyed it with their own hands. The Persians originally called it Parsa in their own proud language. Today, more than 2,000 years have passed, yet the world can only remember its existence in the language of its conquerors and destroyers. Today, we will embark on an in-depth journey through time. We will step into the supreme ceremonial center of the Persian Empire, returning to the few hours before its tragic downfall. We will explore what kind of city this was, why it took over a century to rise from the dust, and why it was burned to the ground in a single night of revelry. In 522 BC, a dramatic upheaval occurred at the core of power in the Persian Empire. A Persian nobleman named Darius I, relying on extremely formidable military force, sophisticated political maneuvering, and terrifying slaughter, quelled rebellions everywhere, and successfully seized the throne of the Achaemenid Empire, known in history as Darius I or Darius the Great. At this time, Darius had become the absolute master of the largest empire on earth. Wherever his eyes could see, it was all Persian territory. To the east, the empire's tentacles extended to the edge of the Indus River Valley. To the west, it crossed Asia Minor, reaching the blue waves of the Mediterranean Sea. To the north, it encompassed the vast, boundless nomadic steppes of Central Asia. And to the south, it penetrated the scorching sun and yellow sands of ancient Egypt. This was a super empire with a massive population of 50 million in the ancient world. This accounted for nearly half of the global population. To manage this behemoth, Darius divided it into 23 provinces, satrapies. He was not short of magnificent capitals. He already possessed 3 world-class centers of the time: the warm climate winter capital of Susa, the pleasantly cool summer capital of Ecbatana, and the administrative and economic center of Babylon, which boasted a long history and a complete bureaucratic system. However, Darius wanted something different. He did not need to build another administrative stronghold filled with bureaucratic documents and tax collectors. He needed a pure capital of spirit and ceremony. He wanted to build an ultimate stage where representatives from all 23 provinces of the empire could gather at a specific time every year to showcase the empire's endless wealth and to consolidate the internal unity of this multi-ethnic, multicultural empire. In 518 BC, Darius' grand vision began to turn into reality amidst the dust of the Mavdasht plain. He personally selected a prime location at the foot of Mount Ramat. Darius' top engineers designed a civil engineering project that was unprecedented at the time, a massive artificial platform covering a full 13 hectares, 130,000 square meters. Imagine this colossal undertaking. Workers quarried thousands of tons of dark grey limestone from nearby mountains, cutting and polishing them. The stone retaining walls of the platform towered up to 18 meters above the plain at their highest point. It was filled with millions of mud bricks, and the surface was paved with massive stone blocks, whose joints were so precise that not even a blade could be inserted between them. This was absolutely not a fortress. Its walls were too low to withstand a true large-scale military siege. From the very beginning of its design, Parsa was not born for war. It was a sacred stage transcending the mortal world, an altar for the Persian Empire to display its legitimacy and supreme glory to the gods of heaven and all the nations of the world. When we talk about the wonders of the ancient world, whether the pyramids of Egypt or the Colosseum of Rome, images often spring to mind of emaciated slaves wailing in agony under the overseer's whips. However, Persepolis shattered this historical stereotype. The astonishing discovery by the University of Chicago in the 1930s, when a team of archaeologists from the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago was conducting a systematic excavation of the ruins of Persepolis. They discovered tens of thousands of clay tablet documents in the corner of a room that had been destroyed by fire. These clay tablets were inscribed with Elamite and cuneiform script. Initially, scholars thought these were grand royal edicts or profound religious texts, but when linguists successfully deciphered these texts, historians around the world were shocked. They were extremely detailed archives of wage and logistical records. These clay tablets not only overturned the hypothesis of a city built by slaves, but also showed us a highly organized functioning mechanism of an ancient empire, even possessing some modern welfare characteristics. The clay tablets listed the identities, professions, birthplaces, and the remunerations owed to thousands of workers by name. The ones transporting the giant stones were native Persian stonemasons. The decorators carrying out the fine painting and gold leafing were from Media and Egypt. The ones firing the mud bricks were experienced Babylonian brickmakers, and the ones carving those lifelike human and mythical beast reliefs were top-tier sculptors from Ionia, of Greek descent. Records clearly show that female artisans worked side by side with men on the scaffolding. And in certain highly skilled positions, women even served in roles similar to foremen, earning higher wages than regular male workers. Most movingly, the clay tablets contained administrative records of special postpartum rations. The empire not only guaranteed their basic salary, paid in wine, mutton, and grain, but also provided new mothers who had just given birth with extra high-quality grain and wine as nutritional subsidies. There were even detailed regulations on the subsidy amounts for mothers of boys and mothers of girls. This city was built by a group of free laborers. They crossed the boundaries of race, language, and faith to contribute their talents here, receiving the compensation and dignity they deserved. The construction receipts of Persepolis prove this point. This was a super project that truly mobilized the resources of the entire known world. Darius' bill of materials was like an ancient world trade map. Top-grade cedar wood from the mountains of Lebanon was transported thousands of miles by elephants and water currents. Gold came from Lydia, Asia Minor, and Bactria, Central Asia. Lapis lazuli was produced in Sogdia, turquoise came from Khwarezm, ivory was sourced from Ethiopia and India. When Darius ordered pure gold and silver foundation plaques to be buried beneath the foundation of the Apadana audience hall, he proudly inscribed this message in Old Persian: "I am Darius, King of kings, king of countries, monarch of the earth. With this, he proclaimed that the territory and power of the Achaemenid Empire had surpassed mortal imagination. In 486 BC, carrying the regret that Parsa was not fully completed, Darius the Great passed away suddenly. But he handed over this grand vision, the blueprints, and an empire with a full treasury intact to his son, Xerxes. I was a monarch filled with even greater ambitions, perhaps even possessing a certain fanatical trait. During his reign of over 20 years, he exhausted the empire's power to complete those miraculous buildings that would forever define the skyline of Persepolis. Imagine, you are a foreign envoy arriving at Persepolis for the first time. As you slowly approach the plain from the west, the first thing to catch your eye is a dual-ramp staircase wide enough for 2 chariots to gallop side by side. As you ascend the steps, you are greeted by Xerxes' ultimate declaration used to awe the world. The Gate of All Nations, a square hall about 25 meters on each side, supported by 4 massive stone columns reaching into the clouds. Flanking the eastern entrance of the gate stand guard 2 fearsome lamassu, mythical beasts with the majestic faces of humans, the muscular bodies of bulls, and the giant wings of eagles. Each lamassu is carved from a single block of limestone, weighing tens of tons. The sculptors employed highly masterful optical illusion techniques. As you walk past them, the beast's eyes seem to constantly stare at you, as if able to see through to the depths of your heart to gauge your loyalty to the empire. Above the door, in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, Xerxes carved an inscription that would be passed down through the ages. King Xerxes says, "By the grace of the highest god, Ahura Mazda, I built this gate of all nations." Many other beautiful buildings were also built in this Parsa, constructed by me and my father. Whatever seems beautiful in the eyes of the world, all was built by the grace of Ahura Mazda. Passing through the gate of all nations and heading south, you will arrive at the absolute core of Persepolis, the Apadana. This is one of the most astonishingly massive indoor spaces of the ancient world. The Great Hall covers an area of 12,000 square meters, almost equivalent to the size of 2 modern professional soccer fields. Supporting this massive roof are 72 exquisite fluted stone columns. Each column is 24 meters high, equivalent to an 8-story modern building. The central hall features 36 columns arranged in a 6x6 grid, while the north, east, and west porticos each boast 12 columns. The tops of the columns can be called masterpieces in the history of sculpture, bearing capitals in the shape of double-headed bulls, lions, or eagles weighing several tons. Looking up, the ceiling is built entirely of imported Lebanese cedar wood, its surface covered in vibrant mineral pigments and thick pure gold leaf. When the first rays of morning sunlight pour in through the high-side windows, the entire interior of the hall shines with a dazzling golden red glow. Here, 10,000 people could easily and comfortably gather to hold grand worship ceremonies. On the eastern side of the Apadana stands the equally massive throne hall of 100 columns, begun by Xerxes and finally completed by Artaxerxes. Its footprint is even larger than the Apadana, spanning almost the size of a modern city block, though slightly lower in height. This is where the empire held military receptions, inspected the royal guard, the immortals, and listened to the reports of satraps from various regions. The stone gates are covered with mighty reliefs of the Persian king fighting bloody battles with various mythical monsters. Further south is the Takara winter palace of Darius, cleverly designed to capture the winter sunlight, and the Hadish palace of Xerxes, carved directly into the mountain rock. Overlooking from the balcony of Xerxes' palace, the king could take in the entire platform and the vast plains beyond. Deepest within the architectural complex is the heavily guarded royal treasury. This is a massive labyrinth-like complex of storage rooms where the annual tributes accumulated by generations from the 23 provinces were piled mountain high. Tons of gold ingots, silver vessels, rare gems, exquisite silk and linen textiles, and even indoor enclosures specially built for rare birds and exotic beasts. To maintain the operation of this city in the sky, Persian engineers invented the extremely ingenious Chanat system, an underground aqueduct network, drawing water from deep mountains. It not only provided a continuous supply of clear mountain spring water for tens of thousands of people, but its technology later spread throughout the Middle East and has been passed down for millennia, continuing to benefit people in arid regions today. Persepolis was not designed for secular daily rule. Babylon was the place for those mundane matters. Parsa existed for a sacred moment, Nowruz. Nowruz, meaning new day, is the Persian New Year. For over 3,000 years, and still celebrated by nearly 300 million people globally today, Nowruz marks the arrival of the spring equinox, usually on the 20th of March, or 21 of the Gregorian calendar. On that day, the Earth's day and night achieve perfect balance. In the ancient cosmology of Zoroastrianism, Nowruz is not merely the changing of a season, it holds extremely strong cosmic theological significance. The supreme god symbolizing absolute light, truth, wisdom, and order. The evil god symbolizing darkness, lies, and endless chaos. Winter is the season when dark forces run rampant, while the spring equinox is the sacred moment when the god of order, Ahura Mazda, utterly defeats chaos, making harsh winter give way to rebirth and darkness yield to light. Fire is an incredibly sacred medium in Zoroastrianism, symbolizing purity and divine presence. Nowruz is a national carnival celebrating the eternal victory of light. In Persepolis, Nowruz is not just a religious ceremony, but an annual renewal of the political legitimacy of the entire empire. This grand ceremony was forever immortalized in the exquisite reliefs on the northern and eastern staircases of the Apadana. Let us close our eyes and imagine ourselves on the morning of the 20th of March, 450 BC. You are a member of the Armenian delegation. For this day, you and your people have trekked thousands of kilometers, crossing high mountains and deserts, escorting the griffin-handled silver vessels that the most outstanding craftsmen in your tribe spent years forging. As the first ray of sunlight cleaves the silhouette of the Mountain of Mercy like a golden sword, the mighty procession begins to climb the grand staircase. Your nasal cavity is filled with the fatty aroma of roasted whole lamb and the sacred scent of burning high-quality frankincense. By your ears, hundreds of musicians simultaneously blow bone flutes and pluck lyres, playing hymns in praise of Ahura Mazda. Walking ahead of you are Babylonians wearing fringed robes and high hats. Following behind you are dark-skinned Ethiopians leading giraffes. 23 nations, 23 different skin colors, costumes, and languages converge into a magnificent river surging together toward the King of Kings. You pass through the gate of all nations and step into the golden, resplendent Apadana. 10,000 elaborately dressed nobles and envoys crowd the hall with 72 giant columns towering into the clouds overhead. In the deepest part of the dome, the King of Kings sits upright on a throne made of gold. You step forward, kneel on both knees, and present the silver vessels representing submission. The king nods slightly, and a Persian attendant immediately hands you a generous return gift. A Persian gold bracelet of incredibly complex craftsmanship and a bolt of priceless, fine linen. This is the true political wisdom of Persepolis. Reciprocity. Those reliefs carved on the steps outside commemorate not cruelly exploitative taxation, but mutual obligation and respect. The Persian Empire maintained the lifeblood of its vast empire through the exchange of gifts. After the tribute ceremony is a legendary banquet that shocked the ancient world. This is not just a privilege for a few royal family members, but a grand carnival where up to 15,000 people dine together every day. The royal tables are filled with incredible delicacies, heavy sweet and sour meat stews, seasoned with cumin brought from Ethiopia, saffron rice dyed golden yellow, and exuding a mesmerizing aroma, exotic birds and beasts coated in edible pure gold leaf. The Greek historian Xenophon once marveled in his writings that Persian court chefs were simply magicians inventing new dishes every day that the Greeks had never even heard of. More importantly, records on the wage clay tablets confirm that even those ordinary stonemasons and brickmakers sweating on the scaffolding received doubled rations of wine, high-quality grain, and roasted meat on this day. Everyone ate very well. Around you, Babylonians, Indians, Egyptians, Scythians, and Lydians, 23 nations that once slaughtered each other, are now sharing a meal on this giant platform. This is an empire that knows how to nourish its people and embrace their cultural differences. For 200 years, this awe-inspiring scene repeated itself every spring equinox. Nations ascended the steps, the monarch received them and bestowed gifts, subjects shared the grand feast, and the empire was renewed amidst hymns of praise. Until 331 BC, when that young man who changed the trajectory of world history crossed the Hellespont. Everything came to an abrupt halt. Those Macedonian generals who had followed Alexander through life and death, now each as wealthy as a nation, raised their glasses in revelry, celebrating their complete crushing of the richest imperial heart in the known world. In the VIP seats sat a woman named Tharhaz. She was no ordinary camp prostitute, but a high-class courtesan, Hetaira, from Athens. In ancient Greek society, ordinary respectable women could only live in seclusion, while high-class courtesans were independent women who had received extremely strict elite education, were well-versed in poetry and philosophy, and had seen the world. They often accompanied the most powerful men and could even participate in the highest levels of intellectual debate and political decision-making. Their status at the time was the companion of Ptolemy, Alexander's most trusted general and childhood friend. This Ptolemy later became the pharaoh ruling Egypt, starting the famous Ptolemaic dynasty. When the banquet reached its climax, at the moment when everyone was dead drunk and reason began to collapse, Thars suddenly stood up from her ornate cushion. The entire noisy hall instantly fell silent. Everyone's gaze focused on this beautiful and dangerous Athenian woman. Swaying her figure, she walked up to Alexander's throne and in a highly infectious and inflammatory tone, delivered a speech that would go down in history. Great Alexander, you have led us to conquer Asia. This is an unprecedented, mighty achievement. But your greatest achievement will be this: join our procession and personally set fire to burn down this palace of the Persian king. Let a woman's hand, in an instant, destroy all the glory that the Persian Empire spent centuries and drained countless blood to build. Let this fire serve as the ultimate revenge for Xerxes arrogantly destroying our Greek temples and burning the Athenian Acropolis 150 years ago. The burning of Athens in 480 BC was a collective trauma for the entire Greek world for a century. Thus words were like throwing a spark into a powder keg. The hall instantly boiled over. Red-eyed Macedonian veterans madly beat their shields, letting out deafening cheers. Alexander, this young conqueror, was now completely overwhelmed by the fanatical atmosphere of the scene. He was immersed in the stimulation of alcohol and the supreme vanity of a conqueror. Perhaps his deep-seated Greek nationalist sentiments, awakened by Thes' vengeful rhetoric. He stood up and loudly announced his agreement to the proposal. They quickly formed a parade procession called a komos, originally a frenzied ritual held to honor Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and irrationality. Alexander, wearing a floral wreath, personally raised the first torch and walked at the very front. Thars followed closely by his side. Musicians played ear-piercing, high-pitched bone flutes and wind instruments. Revelers held hundreds and thousands of torches high, singing and dancing like a wild dance of demons throughout the palace complex of Persepolis. Their target was very clear and full of deliberate vindictiveness: the palace of Xerxes, the symbol of power personally built by the Persian emperor who had burned Athens. With Alexander's tacit approval, they stepped past the crowd and forcefully threw the blazing torch in her hand into the palace's ornate wooden draperies. This was a devastating disaster. The Lebanese cedar wood supporting the Great Hall, though incredibly precious, having weathered a century and a half of the dry climate on the Persian plateau, had long dried out to become the ultimate kindling. In a single breath, the fire surged up fiercely. The flames, like demons possessing life, spread with unstoppable momentum from one carved beam to another, devouring from one hall to another room. In a very short time, the palace of Xerxes turned into a towering sea of fire. Aided by the night wind, the fire rapidly raged out of control. Immediately after, the magnificent Apadana audience hall caught fire, its soaring cedar roof emitting deafening cracking sounds amidst the blaze. The grand stone gates of the throne hall were surrounded by fire. The wooden structures of the treasuries, long since stripped bare, collapsed with a crash into the sea of fire. Alexander's main forces, encamped on the plains a few kilometers away, seeing the soaring flames suddenly rise into the pitch-black night sky, thought a Persian uprising or an accident had occurred in the city, and hastily rushed in fully armed to rescue. However, when they arrived at the scene out of breath, they were stunned to discover their king, Alexander himself, was laughing maniacally as he threw precious Persian wooden furniture into the pyre. The soldiers immediately understood what was going on. Thus, the rescue turned into a carnival of joining the destruction. More torches were thrown into every corner of the city. The great fire burned continuously for days and nights. The magnificent cedar roofs, after turning to ash, crashed heavily to the ground. The exquisite 24-meter-high stone columns, baked under temperatures of thousands of degrees, emitted teeth-gritting cracking sounds, their surfaces disintegrating as if exploding. The few remaining gold and silver artifacts left in the treasury melted in the flames into puddles of liquid metal flowing across the floor. 200 years of glory of the Persian Empire vanished into thin air amidst the soaring black smoke. Regarding this devastating fire, the opinions of ancient historians are deeply divided. Some serious Greek historians claim that this was an extremely cold-blooded, carefully considered political declaration aimed at completely shattering the Persians' illusions of national revival and seeking revenge for Athens. Others insist that it was purely a spontaneous disaster, an out-of-control farce jointly incited by an excess of wine, bewitching rhetoric, and the vanity of a high-class courtesan. The truth is perhaps a combination of both. The thirst for revenge had long lain dormant in Alexander's heart, but the process of destruction was a fanatical impulse amplified by alcohol. Only weeks later, or upon returning to the site, years later, when Alexander sobered up and stood before the devastated ruins where only charred stone columns remained. According to Plutarch's account, he fell into deep remorse. He finally realized that he had destroyed more than just a luxurious palace. He had personally erased an extraordinary monument of early human global cooperation. He had erased an advanced political concept that a massive empire could be maintained not only by force, but also built upon respect for the cultural diversity of its subjects, even when exacting tributes. And what of Thars, the woman who threw the first torch? The irony of history reached its pinnacle here. After Alexander's premature death at the age of 32, Thars officially married Ptolemy and bore him 3 children. Ptolemy subsequently went to Egypt, was crowned pharaoh, established the Ptolemaic dynasty, and built a world-renowned miracle in the capital of Alexandria, the Library of Alexandria. The woman who, in a drunken stupor, personally burned down Persepolis and destroyed countless texts of Persian civilization, ultimately by a twist of fate, assisted in establishing a great cultural institution that preserved the knowledge of ancient Greece and all humanity for centuries. After the fire, with the complete annihilation of the Achaemenid Empire, the ceremonial center of the empire also completely disappeared from the surface of the earth. Persepolis was ruthlessly swallowed by wind, sand, and time, gradually turning into a mysterious earthen mound known only to local shepherds. It was not until the 1930s that the excavation picks of modern archaeologists once again struck the stones here. Those ash layers, 1 to 3 feet deep, miraculously ended up protecting the underlying reliefs and clay tablets from the erosion of wind and rain of later ages. These unearthed Persepolis tablets ultimately proved to the world its magnificent halls were built by the respected hands of free men, not by slaves wearing heavy shackles. In the 1970s, the Iranian Archaeological Department conducted partial restoration work, re-erecting 14 broken stone columns on the ruins of the Apadana, allowing modern tourists to catch a faint glimpse of its original sky-blotting scale. In 1979, UNESCO officially listed Persepolis as a World Heritage Site, recognizing its universal value belonging to all humanity. Today, as you stroll through it, the Gate of All Nations miraculously survived, and the weather-beaten Lamassu beasts still loyally guard the entrance to the ruins. The tribute reliefs on the staircases are exceptionally well preserved. Although the colorful pigments on the surface have long been stripped away by the fire and time, you can still clearly distinguish the deep-set faces of the Armenian representatives, the exquisite textures of the griffin-handled vessels, and the elegant folds on the Babylonian robes. The Takara, winter palace of Darius, situated far from the most severely burned areas, became the best-preserved building, showcasing to the world the ultimate polishing quality of Persian engineering. However, at the bases of those surviving stone columns and walls, you can still clearly see large black burn marks. Those are the terrifying scars forever left on the stones from the night 2,500 years ago when Thaz threw down the torch. What exactly do these ruins teach us? They silently prove the most enduring imperial cohesion in human history is not forged through terrifying slaughter or cruel shackles, but through tolerance and reciprocity. Parsa was once an immortal stage where tributes were used to exchange for honor and differences were woven into a unified tapestry. Buried within the cold ashes of Persepolis lies a profoundly deep philosophy. In that chaotic celebration in 330 BC, filled with clamor and maniacal laughter, a torch of revenge leveled the physical heart of the Persian Empire to the ground. However, fire can only devour stone and cedar wood. It cannot burn away history. Although Alexander's massive empire fell apart almost immediately after his death, plunging into a century-long war of the successors, the spiritual core of Persepolis tenaciously survived. To this day, Nowruz at the spring equinox every year, that festival symbolizing the victory of light over darkness and order over chaos, continues to transcend national borders, races, and religions, uniting a global population of over 300 million, just as it did thousands of years ago on this massive platform built by Darius. Today, the remaining 14 stone columns thrust into the sky from the yellowish-brown dust like broken swords. They stand like silent witnesses to an eternal truth, whispering to everyone who gazes upon them, the arrogance of power can destroy a resplendent palace in a single night. A conqueror's chaotic feast can reduce half the world's wealth to ashes. However, that great concept built upon the unity and mutual respect of diverse peoples is completely indestructible. Fire can devour wood and stone, but it can never devour the cultural heritage forged by free will. If you enjoyed this historical journey through fire and ashes, there are more ruins of lost civilizations waiting for us to rediscover, to explore the codes of rise and fall behind them. Please let me know in the comments section Which lost ancient city should we go rebuild on our next journey? Thank you to all the viewers for your company, and a special thanks to the excellent channel sponsoring members displayed on the screen. If you would like to support this channel in continuing to unearth historical truths, please consider clicking the join button below. See you on our next historical journey.